Hello everyone, welcome to our fourth tutorial. This one's more of an explainer video, but this is in our point and click adventure um, tutorial series. So in this video, what I'm going to do, rather than showing you how I created my room, because you'd already seen for 3 hours me making a room, I'm just going to talk you through what I did for the second scene. This will be exactly what I do for the third one as well. In the next video, I'm going to make my ancient Japan room. And rather than showing you, because everyone's going to have different rooms, different scenarios, different environments, everything's going to look a bit different. So I just thought I'd talk you through what I've done. I'm hoping this will be about 15 or 20 minutes, so it'll be an easier watch, and then that way no one sort of feels like they're having to waste any time or anything like that. Okay, so let's just have a look here. So I just noticed that was a bit out. That's cool. Right, so this is my science lab. I mean, I say lab, it's supposed to be sort of more of like a science room in a museum. Now, I haven't populated it to the amount that I would like. Bear in mind, this took me the majority of the day yesterday, where I was just sort of playing around with some bits and stuff like that. I would have liked to do a little bit more in terms of like a real museum would have a lot more in it, basically, especially around sort of here. It would be busier, there would be a lot more stuff going on. But I could make the excuse that I don't want to clutter my scenes because I want the clues to be obvious and so on. I could use that excuse. It isn't true. It's just that I didn't want to spend absolutely ages on this when this is really a tutorial series. I'm never planning on actually making this game. This is more an asset for me to demonstrate the tutorial. So yes, I would have liked to populate a bit more. It would be nice. It's that typical excuse that I always hear, that if I had more time, I would make it better. That's what people always write in their evaluations. However, I do feel, yeah, if I put a little bit more into this, it might look quite cool. So I'll pick some stuff to do with science, sort of organisms, test tubes, you know, computing. We've got some information on black holes and stuff like that. And I just started wanting to put a few bits around. Now, I didn't over clutter it with information because it's quite important for the clues. One thing to note, obviously, is the signage. I'm trying to sort of make it feel like these are joined up rooms, even though they're not. Obviously, you're coming in here in this direction from the planet's room, and then you'll go off to ancient Japan. So we're sort of progressing through the museum. And I will have the walk cycle, like I said at the start, and my title, where the character is just going to walk from one side to another. So I'm going to put a mask sort of here and here, where the character will seemingly disappear into the corridor, but actually it's just hiding behind a mask layer which is above it. And what I've done with that in mind, the character will be able to walk here. It will walk just in front of this sort of stand here, but it would walk behind this desk, my character in that scene. I mean, it'll only be a small thumbnail. So therefore, that meant in my layers, I have brought the front desk right to the top. Rather than putting it on its own separate layer, rather than putting it on its own separate own asset layer, rather than putting it as part of the scene, I've put it on its own layer, so it's easy for me to sort of manipulate later and move to the correct area. So let's just check that, because obviously I just clicked front desk and it wasn't part of it. So make sure that you right click on everything, make sure you've got them on the correct layer that you want them on. Move. Let's see what else isn't part of that layer, so you can just see how I constructed that. I'm not going to move the shadow as part of it. I'm not too worried about having shadow in. The shadow will actually help me when I come to place the assets, because anything that's on its own separate layer, I'm going to export separately, so that then I can remake the scene altogether. Because some of these assets, obviously, as we spoke about in the last video, are going to be interactive. You need to click on them, and I could do that with empty sort of hitboxes. So I could put blank boxes on top of them, so that when they click on that blank box, they feel like they're actually clicking on the object, but realistically, you're just clicking on a blank box that the player can't see. However, I've got good intentions here, so that I'm going to let's just bring that up to the right there. I'm going to export assets individually. So if you do want to change the layer order and so move this above another object like I just did there, you just press page up, or if you want to move it down like I did with this object, you can press page down in Inkscape, I found out, and that will help. So obviously anything that comes off the page is cut, so it doesn't matter too much. These lines are all pointing towards this circle here. Now the reason I've left this circle on, it's not actually part of my scene, but this is my sort of horizon line. This is my point that everything was coming back to. I was drawn in 1 point perspective like we did in the other video. So if you follow all these lines, they sort of all come towards that point there. I mean, this one probably could be a bit sharper of an angle, but they roughly all come to that point, including the lights in the ceiling, the posters, everything. That's how you get this sort of three-dimensional feel, whereas this is obviously just a flat static image, but it feels like there's depth to my scene. Okay, and that's what we're doing. And the same with these sort of sci-fi looking porthole sort of things in the wall. Here's what I've sort of created for that, and this is what these horizontal lines do. Remember, horizontal and vertical lines stay the same, but anything else that you're trying to like follow the roof or something like that, they will point towards this point. Okay, so I've also, an important thing where I'm sort of trying to show the shadowing of this to make it feel like, you know, we're losing some light is bouncing, so the majority of the light will hit the center, that's fine, but there'll be some shadowing in the corners where the light doesn't quite get into the corner. And to do that, we did use drop shadow like we'd used in the last video, but the way I used it this time, I didn't want it to do that. The way I've used it this time, if I just show you one on a shape that doesn't have it. So if I go filter, shades, drop shadow, up comes the box, but this little box here, so outer, rather than if I press live preview, you could either have the drop shadow appear on the outside, or if I change it so that it appears on the inside, which is what I've done here, the shadow, rather than appearing like it says sort of outside of it, which wouldn't look real, is appeared on the inside of this shape that I've drawn inside. So you get this sort of shadowed inner fill, which is exactly what I was looking for. So that's pretty important. That gives depth, and it's important to sort of do that for objects as and where you can. So if we filter shadow, drop shadow, let's live preview, so you can see what happens with inner versus outer. So that outer sort of shape, I mean, up to you whether you want to keep stuff like that or not, but light will then bounce off. I've also created a layer called shadows, put it right down in the bottom where I've created look, this opacity is at 10%, this layer, and I've drawn these shapes in here, so it makes it feel like you're losing a bit of light. There's a bit of shadowing there. I've drawn my own shadows as such. I also drew on here for my solar wind turbine sort of thing, sorry. So let's just talk you through my layers, and then I'll talk you through how this room's going to work, and then any other tips that I've got for it. So I've got a base layer, which is essentially just a white shape, just a white square that goes across the whole thing, just because it would save me having to draw sort of white space for these walls or this shape and so on. I didn't have to fill it in. Got my floor layer, which obviously is these lines, and also these lines from the hall. Now, because I did this completely in Inkscape rather than going into GIMP, I haven't used textures this time, whereas before I used like a parquet floor, and I used some sort of caustics for the walls and so on. This time I just use gradients, okay, with the gradient tool over here. So when you click on a shape, and you can click on a gradient and move it around and so on. And choose, if you click on either of those points, you can choose the color. You see down here the color that that point has. So I'm moving very gently from sort of this light sort of beigey orange to a darker sort of browny orange, just to make it feel like there's a bit of shadow. So like the light's hitting here and then it's getting a bit darker as it goes on. Should be nice and subtle. I'm doing the same for the wall up here as well. It just we're trying to create it, make it feel a little bit like the light is getting lost as it goes into a darker space. Okay, and that's why the top of the hallway is completely in shadow, because it's not receiving any light bounce really. So that's my flooring. Obviously, like I said before, my tiles or my lines come towards our center point, our reference point in the middle, the cross that we've made, which is a circle in this. So that's how we create depth. It's so important that you line all those up as best as you can, because that's what creates the illusion of depth. If one or two of those are out, it will feel a bit trippy. It will feel like something's not quite right in your scene there. I've just noticed, I mean, it's nice to, I'd say I left some of this on purpose, but just noticed that this line here doesn't actually make it all the way to the wall. So if I make sure, I'm sort of trying to line it out with that. So if I make sure it does come all the way there, because obviously it wants to snap to like objects and things because it thinks it's helping us out. Which is really not in that scenario. Okay, so that's cool. So all those lines come down, creating that depth. Happy days. So that's my floor level. Background reference, obviously, I just brought in my old scene just to make sure that I was my scene one, just to make sure that I was getting the walls right. Now, what I'm planning on doing, if you remember the old scene, I had like a little corridor sort of section that went down here, so it looked like the room had a little bit more depth. But I wanted three rooms that were similar, but felt a little bit different each to the one. So what I've done is, in that room I've got a corridor there. This room I have none. It's a flat back wall, and in the next room I have the corridor here. So I'm just going to flip the scene essentially. So they're sort of basic enough, simple scenes that you don't have to register too much information about, but it just makes them all feel different from one another, you know, plausibly like they're different rooms. So, but I do like when we've got a little corridor, it creates a bit more depth, and you wonder what's going on back there, or it might lead to a different room and so on. So that was the idea, but this is the joining room, okay? And I felt it was important to get my horizon lines the same, especially this back wall, so people are looking at the same sort of part of the screen. Your eye is naturally drawn to the center of an image, really, unless there's something that pulls it away, and that's what this board was supposed to be for me, and I'll explain that why. But naturally my eye is sort of drawn to about this area. It's the rule of thirds, really, so you don't put too much in this third or this third, but in this third of the sort of window I'm seeing quite a lot of information, and you'll probably cover that if you do any sort of design stuff at university or anything like that. After this, the rule of thirds, but it's worth looking at. But however, yeah, I wanted the eye to be sort of drawn straight here because this is where all the clues and information for solving this puzzle is going to be, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that's my background reference. I've also got a reference layer where I brought in loads of information on the sides for sort of different shapes and things that are sciencey, just that inspired me to sort of make this feel a bit more sci-fi, and I'll turn that off. So because it's off the canvas, off the page, it's not going to affect my work. It was really useful rather than flicking between images to have that there. I've got my walls. Does what it says on the tin. All the lines that create the walls, they're on a separate layer. I've got my roof layer, same thing. I've got my assets, which is anything that I don't necessarily want to be clickable. These realistically could be in that scene if I wanted them to be. However, I've put them sort of in walls. But it's making sure, because this I don't find Inkscape as intuitive when it comes to working out what layer you want to be working on. Illustrator is very good. If you've clicked on that layer, it will work in that layer. Whereas if I accidentally then click off of this layer and start working on another one, start working on another shape. So if I've clicked on a layer and then I click over here to start working on this desk thing, it will click off the layer for me, and it thinks it's helping by then selecting the layer that this shape is in on the front desk, where realistically I want to still be working in this layer. And that happens when you accidentally click on stuff. So then I've so I've got my assets which won't be clickable, and then I've got my assets, I've just realized where I made that desk obviously, and then put assets below it. I didn't put my beakers and stuff. You've probably been noticing that well before I did, but the beakers and things should be, if I just put, they should be at the front desk. However, I put them on the wrong layer clearly, because they should feel like they're on the desk, which they didn't. So let's move layer to front desk. Okay, feels a bit better, although that one overlaps incorrectly now. So let's just press page up. There you go, and it moves it back in front of it. Okay, so originally I was thinking of doing a whole microscope scene and stuff like that, make it feel a lot more sciencey and that, but time was sort of ticking on, and I thought I'm just going to put some test tubes. Okay, it's not going to go away, but yeah, with a bit more time I would have put a whole sort of science scene here and so on, but you'll sort of still get the gist of the scene and hopefully solve the puzzles interestingly. But the more stuff you put in, obviously the harder it makes to work out what you're supposed to be clicking on, which is kind of what we're going for. We want to make this difficult rather than, mine's quite straightforward, but yeah, depends how much time you're putting into each and every scene. So now I've got my interactive objects that people will click on that will help solve the puzzle. So I've got my atom there. The circle obviously is just that circle in the middle here, which every line's going towards. So I wanted to put that on top of everything so I could keep seeing it. But now that I'm quite happy with that, I can turn it off. Now that I've explained it, I don't need it. It wasn't part of my scene. Like I said, I've got a shadow layer, so it just create a depth, makes everything feel a little bit more plausible, like it's supposed to be in the scene. So I created shadows as well for sort of this rope around here. Just makes everything feel a bit more grounded in the scene. Got my radioactive in the corner, radioactive waste. That will become relevant when I was trying to work out what clues I can make for my puzzle. I've got my black hole poster. Again, another clue. I've got my computer poster, though if I turn that layer off, I notice that the background part of the computer is on the wrong layer. So this is why it's important to just go through everything. You can assume that you've done everything on the right layer and then realize you haven't. So if I make sure that part's on the same layer too, yep. And then I was thinking about doing something on the screen, but didn't in the end. Let's just move that away. Let's move this up to the top. Nope, still not there. Right, let's just make sure these are on the correct layers. Move to layer computer, yes. Let's page up, page up, page up. Let's make sure this is on the right layer. Computer move, good stuff. And let's make sure this is on the right layer. Nope. Move that to the right layer. Page down. There we go. And we're good. Let's just turn off computer layer. Alright, so my background's still on the wrong layer. Move to layer, computer. So this is why it's important, because obviously when I try and export this shape individually without anything else in there, it'll be important that it's on the right layer. Okay, so let's send it back. That was just supposed to be the shadowing. Struggling here with getting my font to be on top. Let's just click a million times because obviously these little buttons I made are obviously creating a lot of clicks as well. Let's move that back to about there. Let's move sites back on top. Still not quite on top, is it? There you go. So I just had to push page up one more time and it finally got to the top. Cool. Not the best computer anyone's ever made, but do a job. If we just quickly, so everything I'm drawing is trying to sort of be in perspective. I mean, my Newton's Cradle wasn't quite in perspective either. I was looking at that being on a different desk, and then I moved it to here. So, yeah, so we've got all our assets. Newton's Cradle was the next one that I had on there. Felt a bit sciencey, and again, it's another clue, and you'll see why. So organisms. Organisms were the next one. So if I turn those off, you can see these are sort of organisms. I was looking at stereotypical shapes that you could recognize, because I was looking at things like what shape is a neutron, what shape this is the atom, a neutron, electron. How would people know enough about science to be able to recognize those as clues, which I didn't feel they probably could. I gave the rope its own layer, rope and the instructions I put together on a layer. Probably should have changed the name of that layer, but because I wanted them to sit on top of the electrons, on top of the organisms, but I didn't want them to be in the assets layer, because the assets layer is below this. Okay, so it would have looked like it was on the wrong layer. So therefore I put it on its own layer above everything. So you've got to think about the structuring. And obviously I said that my top layer is the front desk, because when basically I'm going to bring this in when I create my animation walk cycle, so the character is going to look like it walks from one corridor to the other. I want it to look like it walks in front of this, but behind this desk. And to be able to do that, I could potentially use a mask the shape of this desk, so the character part of his body becomes blurred behind it. But the way I've chosen to do it is by bringing it in as a separate asset, so that it walks behind it. Now what I'll have to do is export each and every individual asset. I'll export a background. I'll show you myself doing that and turning everything off. I don't need to be static. I want to be static, sorry. Anything interactive I'll export on its own, like I did in the first video. But if I just explain the puzzle to you, so people are going to look at the scene, well, what am I supposed to do? Hopefully they're then drawn here, and I've got this sort of ABC style set up here, where we're quite used to ABC cards. B is for ball, A is for apple, and so on. So I followed that style. I know it's not particularly legible, so M is for microscope, but that's why I've used this sort of silhouette, which hopefully is recognizable. So M is for microscope. Okay, you think, well, that's strange that that's on a board of academics. Why would they put this with all their equations and so on? And atom, yeah, obviously it's an atom. That feels a bit weird on there, and you start to ask questions about it and so on. And then we've got this here. So here's our clue that we're solving essentially. So this is clearly from the periodic table. So C, which is the sixth element, which we know is a non-metal, and I can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces below, like a bit of a sort of like hangman. So I'm thinking, well, hold on, what is C? Now, if you don't want me to spoil this, if you want to play my game without knowing, you can fast forward ahead a bit here. But I'm about to explain that. So spoiler alert, coming right now. But the C would essentially stand for carbon in the periodic table, so they'd work out CARBON. Which then you'd think, okay, well, I'm missing carbon, so what does that mean? Okay, and then but then that ties into this section here. So M is for microscope. So if M is for microscope, what would C stand for in carbon? Which then gives us an opportunity to try and solve these. So I'd start looking around the room for things that begin with the C, and then you think, well, I'll try some stuff. Well, I can't click on this, or would it be this? And then suddenly I click on the computer again. I think, oh, okay, computer. And what I'll probably do in probably, I'm not sure, but in Construct is sort of have a light system in my HUD where once they've clicked on one of them, I might sort of a green circle will appear with a 1 in it, so that I've got my C, or I might even have a green circle with a C appear at the top, so people go, oh, okay, that's right. Well, now I need to find an A for something, so I'm going to look around. And atoms on here, and always clickable, so it's point and click event. So I click on A, so an A appears up here. I've got my A, so I've spelt car so far, so I need my R. So what's R? I'm looking around. So this is it. You're trying to get people to look into your scene, and the more stuff you've got, the more interesting it becomes. And radioactive. Okay, so that begins with R, and then I've got B, black hole, O. Okay, organisms. So I can click on those, and then N, and then hopefully this one will be a bit of a puzzler, but I've got Newton's cradle, which is nice and small, but still quite obvious what it's supposed to be, hopefully anyway. It's always hard to know when you've designed it yourself and you know exactly what it is you're drawing, but other people might not be able to interpret it the same. But it's supposed to be hard enough that it takes a few minutes to sort of solve. Once they've worked this out, they'll feel good about themselves for solving it, and then they'll think, well, but then what am I supposed to do with that information? And that's why you get this feedback at the top here. And if they click them out of order, so they accidentally click on, C, R, that'll wipe all their work, so that'll go back. So that information there that we'll probably put in the top corner will then give them information basically saying, all right, well, I clicked the wrong button and I lost all my progress, so I need to make sure I don't make mistakes, or just randomly click on everything, because otherwise you could just spam every object until you get the right answer. So that's my plan for the room, and that's how I think it's going to work. Hopefully anyway, and that's how I'm going to program it to work. So these objects are all going to be interactive. Now, what I want to do is basically turn off any layers that I don't want to be interactive. Okay, so the way to do that, and just think about obviously the rope I'm going to have to do on its own layer as well, because I'm going to have to drop it on top of the interactive layer. So anything that I don't want to be interactive, but anything that has to sit on top of something else as well. So that I won't be able to include. So I'm just turning these layers off so that I can export a flat layer. Organisms, those are interactive because they're one of my clues. Newton's cradle, computer. You can see the scene becomes quite basic from here. So my black hole poster, my radioactive waste, my shadows I'm going to leave on. That helps me know where to place things. My circle obviously is already off. My atom will become invisible. Assets I'm keeping on because those are the things that belong in the scene. These are going to be non-interactives that you can't click on. Like I said, I could always make like an invisible hitbox if I really wanted to after. I'm going to keep my roof on, my walls on, my reference is already invisible, my background ref is invisible, my floor and my base. So I'm happy that everything I've got here is going to be exported, okay? So I'm just going to save my scene where I have it. I quite like that this tile comes off the screen as well. It's quite neat. Right, and I'm going to export a PNG image. We've done this before. I'm only going to do it once, and then I'm going to export everything on its own. You don't have to watch every single one. So I'm going to make sure page is selected, okay, so that I'm just getting my canvas, just getting my page. I'm going to press export as to make sure I'm saving the name. I'll make sure I'm choosing a name, so scene 2. So I'm going to call this scene 02 background. Save. Okay. Brilliant. Now, what I can do as well, so that I can create a thumbnail basically for my YouTube. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I like to have an image that shows everything, shows how the completed scene would look in the right order. I think it's just useful to have an image of that as well. So I could have done that before I started turning everything off, but I'm going to make sure I do it now. So I think I've turned everything back on. Yep, we're good. So I'm just going to go to File, Export PNG. Page is still selected. The correct folder is still selected, but let's call that C02 full. Again, don't forget to press export, else it won't export your image. Just make sure that that is exported there. So my problem that I just realized I did after ironically telling everybody don't forget to press export is that I didn't press export for my last one. So let's just make sure everything I need is turned on. Right, so I've gone back, export, we've got full, we've got background, and then must press export else it wouldn't go. So we're exporting our page. Okay, that's important. And now what I'm going to do is one by one go through, so I can turn absolutely everything off because I don't need anything in my scene. So I'll turn shadow off, I'll turn assets off, I will turn roof, walls, and floor, and actually base, because no, you can't see it, there's a white shape there for the base. And then I will just go through, obviously anything that was classed as an interactive asset, so like atom, for example, which you can't see because it's white. But if I now come to my selection, export as, let's just make sure this works. Atom, save, make sure I press export. Let's just double check that. Did that save anything? Hard to know, hard to know. I know a way of finding out if that definitely worked. I just want to prove it worked because my image viewer for stuff I've been exporting from Inkscape hasn't actually been working properly, as you might have seen in the HUD video. I'm not entirely sure why, if that's an issue, but I know a couple of you students have had a problem with that as well, so I assume it's something to do with the program. Right, let's then go radioactive. Let's make sure that's selected. Looks quite nice on its own, so selection. Let's go radioactive. Save my PNG, export my PNG, mustn't forget to do that, and then make sure that worked. It'll probably flick up for a second and disappear. Okay, no, it'll work. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do for each and every asset, so that when I bring it in, it'll be exactly the right scale. There you go. I opened it in Photoshop. I know you won't have Photoshop, but you can see that my atom PNG is working. Obviously, it's just white. I'm not promoting Photoshop. I've zoomed in way too much. I know we're doing this all in, there you go, that's at 100%. Now, I'm not saying you have to do this in Photoshop, I just knew it would work in Photoshop because that's how I did it before. So yeah, we're good. Okay, my atom PNG was working, I just wanted to prove that. You obviously wouldn't necessarily need to, I'm just proving that a white on a white background did work. And then what I'm going to do now, you won't have to watch this, but is go through and export every asset that I want to be interactive that didn't come out in the full scene, and then I'm completed. So I can then stitch that all back together in my game engine of choice, which is going to be Construct, and then I can make certain assets interactive that you can click on, so they essentially become buttons which would have actions assigned to them. Yeah, okay. Fingers crossed that was interesting for you. I know it's a bit longer than I probably imagined it was going to be, but hopefully you're learning quite a bit from this series so far. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.